My daughter-in-law called me just the old woman in the house I paid for, while quietly living off my money. So I stopped defending myself, pulled out the bank records, and let the numbers speak for me. "You're just the old woman living here," Nora said, setting her coffee mug down without even looking at me. In that exact moment, I realized that keeping the peace was no longer an option. Ever since my husband passed away 2 years ago, my son, Julian, and his wife had been living in my house. It was a solid, brick colonial in a quiet suburb just outside of Chicago, completely paid off, with a beautiful, spacious backyard. I had agreed to let them move in so they could save up a down payment for a place of their own. Julian had always been passive, the kind of guy who would rather walk on eggshells than face a conflict. Nora, on the other hand, was quick to take over. At first, it was just little things, like rearranging the living room furniture. But today, she went too far. Without asking, she had hauled my grandmother's antique oak dresser down into the dark basement. When I confronted her about it, that was her response. I didn't feel a sudden rush of anger, just a deep, cold sense of clarity. I didn't argue. I didn't take the bait. I just stood there and looked at her. Nora was in her mid-30s, dressed in sharp corporate attire, clearly believing she was the new matriarch of this house. Julian sat at the kitchen table, staring blankly at his phone, completely silent. Seeing my own son's absolute spinelessness stung, but it also opened my eyes. I was 65, healthy, and financially secure. My husband and I had built this life. If they were going to try to push me out of my own space, it was time to change the rules. Without saying a word, I grabbed my keys and my jacket. I wasn't going to cry, and I wasn't going to lock myself in my room. It was time for my first real move, and it started with a drive to the bank. Nora had no idea that this house wasn't the only thing I brought to the table. The teller at Chase Bank had known me for decades. Mr. Vance was an older gentleman who understood the value of discretion. I sat in his quiet office, took a sip of water, and explained exactly what I needed. No tears, no long-winded rants about family drama. I simply asked him for a detailed, certified printout of all my account activity over the last 2 years. Specifically, the automatic monthly transfers leaving my account and hitting Julian and Nora's joint checking account. It was a substantial chunk of change. Every single month, I had been transferring $1,500 to them under the guise of helping out with household expenses. I truly thought I was doing them a favor, giving them a leg up to build their own nest egg faster. On top of that, I had been quietly paying all the major utility bills: electricity, gas, water, and trash. When Mr. Vance handed me the paperwork, seeing the numbers in black and white was sobering. Nora clearly assumed this money was either coming from Julian or was just a given. She just saw a lonely widow, supposedly living off the generosity of the younger generation. I slid the documents safely into my purse. When I got back home, the house was dead silent. Julian was still at work, and Nora was at the stove making dinner. She didn't even glance up when I walked through the front door. It was her favorite mind game, freezing me out to assert dominance. I went upstairs to my room, sat at my desk, and logged into my online banking. It took less than 3 clicks. The automatic transfer scheduled for the 1st of the month was officially canceled. It was the 25th, in exactly 6 days. My son's bank account was going to take a massive hit. I went to bed early that night and slept sweeter than I had in months. The next morning, It was time for another shift in the house. The next morning started like any other day for them. They were sitting in the kitchen, sipping coffee, completely ignoring my existence. I walked right past them into the hallway without saying a word. The night before, I had already packed a few essential boxes. My destination was the small in-law suite on the second floor. It had its own separate entrance, a small bathroom, and a kitchenette. My husband and I used to rent it out to local college students, but it had been sitting empty since he passed. I started carrying my personal belongings upstairs. Nora stepped out into the hallway, crossing her arms as she watched me haul a box. "What's this spring cleaning?" she asked, her voice dripping with sarcasm. I paused on the stairs, turned around, and looked her dead in the eye. "I'm moving my living quarters upstairs," I said, keeping my voice completely level. "The downstairs is all yours, but as of today, I am no longer responsible for cleaning up the common areas." Nora let out a dry laugh. "As if that makes a difference?" She still didn't get it. She thought I was waving the white flag, retreating to the attic to let her run the show. What she failed to realize was that by removing myself from the ground floor, my daily labor stopped too. No more doing their laundry, no more vacuuming the living room, and absolutely no more grocery shopping for the whole house. When I closed the door to my new space upstairs, a wave of relief washed over me. I turned the deadbolt. It was my house, and my right. Downstairs. I heard Julian close the front door as he left for work. Not even 10 minutes later, Nora called him. Her voice sounded frantic. She had just realized the refrigerator was completely bare. Grocery shopping had always fallen on me. I was the one who noticed when things were running low. Drove to the store and picked up the tab. Well, the grocery store was officially closed. Later that afternoon, I went downstairs to the kitchen just to grab a glass of water. Nora was standing there with the refrigerator door wide open, staring into the void. There was practically nothing inside except a jar of old mustard and a tub of expired margarine. "Where is all the food?" she demanded, not even turning around. Her tone was entitled, borderline aggressive. "I bought my own groceries, and they're upstairs," I replied calmly. "You're both grown adults. I'm sure you can figure out how to feed yourselves." Nora spun around, her eyes narrowing into slits. "We don't have time to go grocery shopping. Julian works a 40-hour week and I have a packed schedule. This is just petty payback." I walked over to the sink, filled my glass, and took a slow sip. It's not payback. Nora, it's reality. If you want to be the one running the show, you have to handle the logistics. She just glared at me, completely speechless. She was so used to me backing down just to keep things pleasant. But those days were over. That evening, Julian finally got home. From upstairs, I could hear the muffled, angry echo of Nora's voice echoing from the living room. She was practically shouting about my sudden, malicious attitude. Julian tried to placate her, but as usual, he was getting nowhere. A little while later, there was a soft knock on my upstairs door. It was Julian. He looked exhausted, holding a crumpled piece of paper. "Mom, can we talk?" he asked quietly. I opened the door just a crack. The look on his face told me everything Nora's pressure was already getting to him. "What's on your mind, Julian?" I asked, making no move to invite him inside. He looked visibly thrown off by the barrier. Usually, my door was wide open to him. "Nora says you're acting really strange. You didn't buy groceries, and you just moved all your stuff up here. What is going on?" I looked at my son. He had his father's eyes, but none of his backbone. I'm just claiming my own space. Julian, I'm 65 years old, and I want some peace and quiet. Nora made it crystal clear the other day exactly where I stand in this house. I'm simply acting accordingly. Julian swallowed hard. She didn't mean it like that. She's just stressed out with work. Stress isn't an excuse for disrespect, I said firmly. I'm not fighting with her. Julian, I'm just making changes. You two live here completely rent-free. The absolute bare minimum I expect is common courtesy. Since that's off the table, we're going to live separately under one roof. Julian opened his mouth to say something else. But right then, Nora's voice boomed from the bottom of the stairs. Julian, get down here. The DoorDash is outside. He gave me a helpless look, turned around and trudged back down the steps. I shut the door and locked it tight. It was painful to see my own son look so pitiful. But coddling him wasn't going to fix this. It was time for him to grow up and face the music. The next day was the first of the month. The biggest piece of my plan was about to fall into place. I sat down at my small table upstairs, poured a cup of tea, and waited for the inevitable storm to hit. Dear Quiet Revenge community, many of you have been with us through stories of heartbreak, family conflict, forgiveness, perseverance, and quiet justice. We are deeply grateful for your time, your comments, and your support. We also want to be open about our process. While AI tools may help with certain production tasks, every story is carefully reviewed, edited, fact-checked when appropriate, and prepared by our team with great care and respect for our audience. If you would like to help us continue creating meaningful stories, please consider supporting Quiet Revenge with the cost of a small cup of coffee. Patreon, https://www.patreon.com/Quiet Revenge Family. Ko-fi, https://ko-fi.com/Thestry Family. PayPal, https://www.paypal.com/PayPalme/Khan Thank you for helping us keep this community strong and welcoming. The 1st of June turned out to be a gorgeous, sunny day. I spent the whole morning out in the backyard, trimming my rose bushes and soaking in the quiet. Around 2 in the afternoon, I heard Nora's car pull into the driveway. She usually didn't get home until much later, so I knew something was up. Not even 5 minutes later, she marched out into the garden. Her face was flushed red, and she was clutching her phone like a weapon. What the hell is the meaning of this? She practically yelled. I laid my shears down on the grass and looked up at her calmly. The meaning of what? Nora. The money. The $1,500 from your account never cleared. Our joint account is completely overdrawn because my credit card payment just hit. Did you forget to authorize the transfer? I unbuttoned my gardening gloves and slipped them off. I didn't forget anything. I canceled the recurring transfer. Nora took a sharp step closer. You can't just do that. We budget around that money. That was supposed to cover our new car payment and our vacation fund. It was my money, Nora, a gift. Since I'm just the old woman around here who doesn't have a say, I see no reason to keep funding your lifestyle. She gasped, completely blindsided. The cool, calculated corporate mask she always wore slipped entirely. Julian! She screamed toward the house, completely forgetting he was still at the office. In that exact moment, she realized her perceived power in this house was a complete illusion. She had bitten the hand that fed her. I walked right past her into the house without another word. The foundation of her arrogance had just crumbled. That evening, The three of us sat down at the large dining room table downstairs. It was the first time we'd been in the same room in days. Nora had clearly badgered Julian into forcing this meeting. She sat there with her arms tightly crossed, throwing daggers at me with her eyes. Julian cleared his throat nervously. "Mom, Nora told me what happened outside today. You can't just cut us off financially like this. We're family." I opened the manila folder I had brought home from the bank and laid the certified statement right in the middle of the table. "Take a look for yourselves," I said quietly. Julian picked up the paperwork. His eyes went wide as he stared at the final number at the bottom of the page. Over the course of 2 years, I had handed them over $36,000 in direct cash transfers, on top of absorbing every single utility bill for the property. Nora glanced at it and immediately dismissed it with a wave of her hand. "So what? That's the least you could do since we live here and take care of you." "You don't take care of me," I said, my voice cutting through the room like ice. "You ignore me, hide my family heirlooms, and insult me in the home I built. Julian, you actually believed your savings were growing solely because of your hard work. The truth is, I've been subsidizing your entire standard of living." Julian looked over at his wife. It was painfully obvious that Nora had never told him exactly how tight their finances actually were. She had been quietly absorbing my money and passing it off as her own financial success. Now, the well was dry. Nora tried one last-ditch effort to regain control. "We don't need your charity. We can just leave," she snapped. That was exactly what I was waiting for. "You are entirely free to do so," I replied instantly to Nora's threat. The silence that followed was heavy. Julian looked at me, completely pale. He had clearly expected me to cave, apologize, or beg them to stay. Nora's eyes narrowed into slits. "Are you kicking us out?" "No," I said calmly. "You just suggested leaving, and I think it's a wonderful idea. If you're unhappy here and feel the need to treat me with disrespect, moving out is the healthiest choice for everyone involved." "Mom, we can't just find a place overnight. The housing market out here is a nightmare." Julian chimed in, his usual passivity morphing into sheer panic. "That is no longer my problem. Julian, you've had 2 years under my roof to save up. You should have plenty of money for a security deposit, or at least you would have if you had been managing your money responsibly." Nora stood up abruptly. "This is ridiculous. We are not going to sit here and be blackmailed by you. Come on, Julian, we're going into the living room." Julian followed her, but his footsteps were heavy and hesitant. He looked back at me one last time over his shoulder, but my face remained completely stone-faced. I gathered my documents and slid them back into the folder. The ball was entirely in their court now. They were about to find out exactly what it felt like to survive in the real world of soaring rents and skyrocketing living expenses without my safety net. The next morning, I took another practical step to secure my boundaries. I called a local locksmith. This wasn't a legal battle. It was a simple matter of property rights. By Thursday morning, a commercial locksmith van was parked right in my driveway. The technician worked quickly, replacing the deadbolt on my upstairs entrance and installing a brand new, secure lock on the interior door that connected the ground floor to my suite. Later that afternoon, I heard Nora come home from work. It didn't take long before I heard her trying to jiggle the handle of the connecting door, expecting to barge into my space like she always did. The key wouldn't turn. She pounded loudly on the solid wood. I slid open the small wooden privacy window I had asked the locksmith to add. "What is this supposed to be? Why am I locked out of this part of the house?" she demanded. furious. "This is my private residence. Nora," I explained calmly. "If you need to speak with me, you can knock. Your keys only work for the downstairs apartment now." She slammed her palm against the door. "This is unhinged." "No, it's homeownership," I replied, and slid the privacy window shut. A profound sense of freedom washed over me. No more unannounced intrusions. No more catty remarks hurled at me while I was just trying to exist. Downstairs remained incredibly quiet for the rest of the evening. No screaming, no slamming doors. Julian and Nora were trapped in the reality of their own making. Without my money and my cooking, the weight of maintaining a household was hitting them hard. The downstairs hallway was already gathering dust, and the trash bags were piling up by the back door. They were finally learning what independence actually cost. I cooked a quiet dinner in my kitchenette and enjoyed the absolute peace. The power dynamic had shifted completely, and I hadn't raised my voice once. 2 months later, a large U-Haul truck was backed up to the front curb. Julian and Nora had finally found a place, a cramped, 2-bedroom apartment in an older complex all the way across town. It was the only thing they could afford on short notice without my monthly subsidy and with Nora's mounting credit card debt. Julian walked up the stairs one last time to say goodbye. He looked older, carrying the weight of his new reality. But there was a newfound maturity in his posture. Nora stayed firmly planted in the passenger seat of the truck, refusing to even look toward the house. "I'm really sorry for how all of this went down." "Mom," Julian said softly, keeping his eyes glued to the floorboards. I stepped forward and placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "It had to happen this way. Julian, you need to build your own life and learn how to stand your ground. You are always welcome to come back and visit me, but alone, without Nora." He gave a quiet nod, squeezed my hand, and turned to walk down the steps. I stood by the window and watched as the moving truck pulled away from the curb. As it turned the corner and disappeared from view, a deep, warm sense of peace settled into my chest. The house belonged entirely to me again. It was quiet, spotless, and serene. I walked downstairs into the now empty first floor. I had plenty of work ahead of me to clean up the mess they left behind, but it was my mess. In my home, I hadn't destroyed my family. I had simply protected my dignity. Nora thought I was just an old woman she could push around. In the end, I was the one who ended the game not with drama, but with the quiet power of my own bank statement. Dear Quiet Revenge community, many of you have been with us through stories of heartbreak, family conflict, forgiveness, perseverance, and quiet justice. We are deeply grateful for your time, your comments, and your support. We also want to be open about our process. While AI tools may help with certain production tasks, every story is carefully reviewed, edited, fact-checked when appropriate, and prepared by our team with great care and respect for our audience. If you would like to help us continue creating meaningful stories, please consider supporting Quiet Revenge with the cost of a small cup of coffee. Patreon, https://www.patreon.com/Quiet Revenge Family. Ko-fi, https://kodashfi.com/Thestry Family. PayPal, https://www.paypal.com/PayPalme/Kanhuangmin. Thank you for helping us keep this community strong and welcoming.